So this is an Agile experience report, and I had like a unique experience to run a training program, a very targeted 6-week training program for a leading investment bank, and I did it 3 times in 2007. So as a result, each time I was able to introduce different process elements into the program, and over time, sort of the way we ran the program got better, and then the last time I will tell you how I introduced more specific elements from Scrum methodology into that, and kind of comment on some of the results and some of the experiences that we had. So basically, I'm going to just talk a little bit about how the program generally is structured, and then kind of talk you through each iteration of the program that we ran, and tell you a little bit about each, and sort of some interesting elements as far as the software processes. So first of all, this particular bank, what they do is they run a 10-week, 10-week program for their brand new college graduates who are joining them, which is about 60 people per year overall in the U.S. office, and usually that consists of about 3 weeks of kind of capital markets training and various diversity and various like corporate trainings, things that you have to do if you're working for a bank, like I don't know, don't steal money or something. And then there's 1 week traditional training program, and also a 6-week long project, which is different every single time. What they're doing is they find a sponsor organization within the bank, and they come up with a spec for the training bootcamp to perform, and and then they do it. I should mention this was actually done with the previous company that I used to work for, Infusion Development, which is one of the leading boutique consulting companies for the financial organization. So while I don't do this anymore, I think the experiences are very instructive. So like I said, we did it 3 times. In the spring, we had 22 students. In the summer, we had 22 students as well. And then in the fall, we had 16 students. So the goals of the program itself. So once again, these people, most of them have computer science degrees, although not all of them are going to be programming. Sometimes we have a mix of programmers and infrastructure people who are more, network operations, things like that, business analysts. And also in the last one, we had a couple of people who claimed to be project managers. Claimed just because they're still right out of college. I think they're, at best, very junior project coordinators or something like that. So like I said, the goal is to introduce them to coding practices. How do you develop, how does academic development is different from enterprise development? To have one complete project life cycle under a belt. Now, when I say complete project life cycle, I'm sort of fudging a little bit, right? Because one thing that they didn't have to do is worry about the requirements, because that was usually done up front by us, just because 6 weeks long project, you really don't have enough time. And also, they didn't have to actually roll it out into production. So they would, for example, in the spring program, they came up with a lot of packaging and installation instructions, but sort of 6-week long project is not something you want to immediately put into production. Obviously, teamwork is something very important. They all divided into teams and sort of got to experience team dynamic. Now, the final project, basically, as I'll tell you in just a second, they split up into teams, but the final project was to be integrated. So, there were a lot of integration challenges between different teams. Some semblance of QA practices, and that also evolved over the time that we were doing it. And I guess the number one goal for everything was to have a final presentation to the CIO and their, senior management, basically, where every single student had to talk, and in addition to just sort of speaking, they had to also give a few demos. So iteration 1, this was, so the company that I was working for, they actually have been doing this for the last 10 years or so. But this was my first time, and my manager had about 5 years of experience in this program, so I inherited a lot of the process elements from beforehand. Now, a project was basically to create an operational dashboard for a statement generation process, right? So statement generation process is very complicated, can have, 10, 20 different steps, multiple inputs, and things like that. And so in order to improve that process, the goal was to be able to track the different steps of that process so that you could build up a little picture exactly how long each step takes in that process, right? So our goal was basically to build technology for that. In this particular case, we're working with an existing team that already provided the back end and the UI to what we're trying to build. So our job was basically to build the engine that actually did the processing. So there was a database going on, and we had to populate the database. We got the database layer done for us, and the UI was already done for us. And in this particular case, our goal was to actually, production quality code. And in order to facilitate that, for example, I introduced code review process and JUnit tests. So the basic process for pretty much all projects, it was somewhat Agile-like. If you have 6 weeks to produce something that's in any way, shape, or form can be considered useful, you basically need to be very very focused as to what you're developing, right? So we split the 22 students into teams of about 3 to 5 people, which usually was about 5 or 6 teams. The split up usually happened based on the technology components. So from the architecture perspective, we would split it up into different little modules, and each team was responsible for each one. We tried as best as we could to give clearly defined responsibilities to each team, and each team had a team lead. And so every morning, the way we start a day is we'd have a team lead meeting where we'd try to figure out what happened the previous day and sort of what are the goals for the day to come, and try to resolve any issues. So this is kind of very sort of Scrum-like in a way, except that at the beginning we sort of didn't really sort of ask the 3 Scrum questions. What did you do yesterday? What are you planning to do today? And are there any impediments? It was a little bit more free flow. So we also had one of the teams was actually special operations team. So their job was basically managing the sort of software development process in a way. So things like build, things like coordinating requirements, coordinating documentation, coordinating testing. That was kind of their requirements. That was their responsibility. And in reality, a lot of their work also had to do with making various requests for software that we needed, making sure that the servers were up and running, running the build process and stuff like that. And everybody was in the same training room. So the rough schedule was, week 1 kickoff on some kind of a design phase, or something resembling a design phase. Then week 2 initial implementation. Week 3 complete implementation for each component. Week 4 integration and QA. And then we spent about a week and a half on various presentation-related activities, namely preparing the presentation and basically iterating the presentations themselves up to 5 times before the final presentation, so that at the end, basically the audience saw, 22, almost robots, presenting as if they were doing it for like the last, 2 years. So this is what a room looked like. I don't know if you can see because of the lighting, but basically it's one really big room. This picture is actually from the 3rd Scrum, so you actually see some stuff. It's a little foreshadowing. You see some task boards. But in the first one, we didn't really have anything like that. So it's one big open space. Each team you would usually huddle around one area. And of course, because it was open, there was a lot of free flow of information, which, in my opinion, sort of one of the key things just generally to promote communication. Okay, so we accomplished our goal. We created the we created the dashboard, and in general, the results were quite good. We accomplished. We did the presentation. Everybody was pretty happy. From my perspective, was how do I do it better the next time? And so there were several elements that kind of struck at me. So first of all, when we started doing integration, we experienced major problems because we didn't really plan integrations and really emphasize integration as much as possible ahead of time. When in week 3 or 4 we started to do integration, it was kind of a mad scramble. Right? So from risk management perspective, we identified this as a pretty large risk. From the QA perspective, we did very, very minimal stuff. I was very rigorous to do code reviews, which if you're ever sort of dealing with, especially junior resources, it becomes very key. You want to control as much as possible of exactly what they're doing, as much bandwidth you have, right? Just because, and also my role was dual. Number 1, it was project management and enforcing of coding standards, things like that, and number 2, also training, right? So encoding and code reviews, gives you a very unique ability to kind of do both. Documentation, same thing. We did some documentation, but it's something that always kind of falls on the back burner, and it did in this particular case. Integration tests we were able to achieve, an integrated system test, but once again, it was a little bit later than we would have liked, and so it was a little bit more of a mad scramble. Other lessons learned was that our prioritization wasn't up to par, that we sort of had a general guideline of where we want to be, but because we didn't explicitly state for every single week, this is the exact priorities that you guys should be focusing on, things would slip by 1, 2, 3, 4 days, and then a 6-week program, you really don't have that luxury. And another thing that we wanted for the next one, to have teams to have flip charts of the current priorities that they're working on, right? So this is actually before I even I've heard the word Scrum somewhere, but at this time I wasn't really aware of the Scrum, but this sort of something that kind of came up. Another thing that came out of that is that, especially because these are brand new students working on technologies that are not familiar to them, that the SPY concept, which is like a little prototype in the technology that you're working on, was extremely useful. So the goal for the next one was to encourage them to do little spikes that basically give them general familiarity of the technologies that they're working on, and at least gave them some experience with it, right? And also checklists generally how to approach a task. So sit down with them and kind of say, okay, this is what you need to do. Right now you don't have the skills. This is how you gain the skills in order to get there. And also focus on integration from the very beginning. That was something that we hoped to do, but as I'll mention in a second, we actually weren't able to do. So iteration 2, summer program. So in this case, the fundamental project was very different. It was an extremely technically challenging problem that, looking back on it, wasn't a very good match for a program such as this, because it was basically a set of technologies with which nobody really in the organization, in the client organization, had any experience, right? So the students, they were kind of guinea pigs to learn some of these technologies, and in some ways that was good from the learning perspective. In other ways, neither we nor the organization really had the resources to be able to help them out. And another thing that it also featured is lots of integration between the different components. So we had 2 challenges. We had to learn very new technologies. Some of them are pretty challenging very, very quickly, and integrate them together, sort of just as quickly. And the last thing is also the class happened to be more rambunctious than others, because they sort of knew each other from the previous summer where they were all interns, and so the social aspect of the class sometimes dominated the learning aspect. So like I said, the challenges were that the technology is just very, very hard. Another thing that kind of did not happen for us in this particular case is we never really got a build process. In the first time, we sort of got lucky that the person that was tasked with doing and builds and various build tasks was just very capable, and they just were able to figure it out pretty quickly. In this particular case, the people who were doing it were not as, I think that also the background wasn't really programming, so for them, they basically, took about 3 weeks, maybe even 4 weeks to get a basic build process working, which was a really big problem, especially when we started to integrate. Performance testing is something that we had to do for this. We basically had to deal with very high throughput data streams for this particular project. And performance testing is just a very, very fundamentally hard problem, especially when you're trying to test basically technology to essentially its physical limits. And as a result, because we also didn't really have to put this into production, this was more like a research-oriented project, the quality emphasis wasn't nearly as high, because A, we didn't really need to, and B, because we had a whole other set of challenges to do. And as a result, also, the integration did not happen until very late. Now, one thing that I did introduce during this is about maybe week 3 or 4, basically towards the end, when we kind of realized, okay, we need to have an integrated system, but we only have, out of 10 integrations or so, we only have 3 done, right? So at that point, I introduced what I called a integration dashboard. And this is it. Basically, this is where every morning in our daily meeting, I would ask very pointed questions. I would say, okay, you guys have 3 integrations that you're supposed to be responsible. Who is doing it? and what is the current status, and what's going to be the current status next time. So this allowed us to really focus on our particular goal. And so, as you can see, this represents about a span of about a week and a half or so. This is 27th of August. This is the 6th of September. And as you can see from reds, which is 1.5, which means you just sort of generally started maybe thinking about integrating, but haven't actually done much, to yellow, which means that maybe you got a little proof of concept working of integration, although it's not actually working, well yet, to, green, which is where you basically, have something working, it works reliably, you tested it several times, and then, finally 3, which means that, we're pretty comfortable that we don't have to worry about this integration anymore. And let me see. And and there were times, sometimes where we'd regress, right? And for example, here you see you have yellows, yellows, then all of a sudden reds that maybe a build is broken, so we couldn't really give them sort of the same, yellow mark. And but eventually, as you see, we pretty much got to where we needed. And we actually used this dashboard for 2 purposes. First of all, this is the integration portion. These are all the different interconnections between components, and also for the release process / build process. So as you can see over here, we placed very big emphasis on build towards the end, which eventually we got to, but unfortunately we never really got any use out of build because we only got it very, very late. So some lessons learned. In general, this project went a little bit worse than the spring project. Partially because of the class, partially because the technical challenge was very high, partially because I think maybe some of the lessons that I learned from the fall I didn't apply rigorously enough because there were a lot of other challenges going on. So need clearer prioritization. Dashboard was very useful towards the end, and I will sort of show you how maybe I took that a little bit to the extreme the next time. Need to renew emphasis on quality for the following one because, once again, quality lapsed. We had some unit tests, but they were very, very, very minor. And need to prioritize build process. And also, this is the time when I happened to go to the New York City Spin. They had one of the founders of Scrum, whose name unfortunately escapes me. Not Ken Schwaber. What? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Sutherland. And so he kind of was talking generally about Scrum, and that's what got me a little bit more interested into the Scrum process. So for the following training, I read up a little bit more about Scrum and tried to find what elements might be useful. And like you're probably getting, we sort of already had some semblance of an Agile process, but I guess introducing specific elements of Scrum, as I'll tell you in just a second, ended up being quite useful. So iteration 3. In this case, it was supposed to be a shared component that would be reused across multiple projects for statement generation or document generation. The goal is to create something that was more or less production quality. And this was a new technology to the students and to us, but it wasn't really particularly difficult. The technical challenge was not nearly the same as in the iteration 2. We also had a smaller class, which from the very beginning just seemed to have a very good attitude. They weren't necessarily more capable than the previous classes, but they had they were just a really nice bunch, and they didn't really have any slackers, right? So if in other programs there would be about 3 to 5 people that I strongly felt if they were not part of the program that we would be able to accomplish more. Here we didn't have anybody basically like that, so everybody was a net positive contributor. And also, it was also most diverse, both in terms of roles, meaning that this is where we had, like I alluded, kind of junior project managers. This is where we had more business analysts and operations people. And also, this is where we also had more people from, basically Asia Pacific joining us as well. So, like I said, we decided to Scrum. So because I was sort of the project manager of the project, and these guys don't really know any better, I had the luxury in this case of kind of decreeing it. And the very first day that I met them, I said, Scrum is the process that we will be following, right? So I know that with existing development teams, people don't necessarily have that luxury. But in this case, I just said, this is where we're doing it, and I was never really questioned on it. Now, my challenge was, how do you teach and use Scrum sort of at the same time? And the way I did it is I kind of explained what some of these elements are, and I tried to enforce it as much as possible, especially things that I thought were key, like task boards and a couple of other things. But then other things, because this was ultimately a learning project, and because heavyweight process would have probably hampered us, a little bit. So there were some elements that I never really ended up being very rigorous about, right? Like, for example, burn down charts. We had some semblance of burn down charts, but but I never really sort of enforced it. So, Scrum elements, well-defined sprints. So once again, I wanted to make sure that prioritization is very clear. So the way I approached that would send out an email every single Monday, or basically at the very beginning of the sprint, delineating exactly, okay, this is what we all should be focusing on. The task board, so what we did originally is create one huge task board, which had all 5 teams kind of in different, in different rows. And, the task board, I believe had 4, maybe 5, columns. Number one, it was kind of, the normal Scrum ones, which is kind of, ready to be done, stickies. Then in progress. Then done, awaiting code review, then testing, and then completely done, right? So kind of had 5 things, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Every morning we would also try to generate an impediments list that we would sort of work against and try to make sure that they would get resolved by as early as possible. Like I mentioned, burn down chart was something that I encouraged them to do. For the first couple of sprints, I sort of just explained what it was, but didn't really enforce it. And another thing that we didn't do for the first couple of sprints is we never really, and this was sort of something that we learned a little bit, that I realized a little bit later, we didn't really come up with estimates for tasks. For 2 reasons. Number one is because everybody's learning these technologies, so it's really hard to create estimates. And B, they're not really, the students are not particularly experienced in order to be able to come up with realistic estimates, right? So that exercise would not really have given us that much use anyway. Although arguably, we could have been more rigorous about that. And daily meetings, which sort of in the whole Scrum methodology amounted to the Scrum of Scrums, as opposed to an actual Scrum meeting. Scrum meeting means you're supposed to have everybody present from the team, and with 16 people plus, me plus another guy from my company that was working with me, 18 people, Scrum, I didn't think that would really work. Spikes, here because once again we had new technologies, made heavy emphasis on spikes. Get something very, very basic working, then make it more complicated. And especially in training scenarios, this works very well. Okay, team meetings. Okay, I think I already mentioned. So then another thing that I really wanted to do a better job on was quality assurance. So what I did here is I designated one person in each team, which was different than the team lead, as the QA lead. And so we have separate meetings with QA leads basically saying, okay, these are the priorities for quality. How are you meeting those priorities? And I will show you sort of the final dashboard type thing that that I produced for this. And another thing, this is sort of more more for educational. We also had show and tells, both external, where the people from the organization where we're in would come in and tell us more about the different technologies that are being used that the students would have to interact with, or internal, where students would get up and for 10 minutes present what they were working on. And this is more just for knowledge sharing to make sure that everybody gets a better sense of what everybody's working on. Almost done. So this is an example of prioritization email. So like I said, congratulations, almost completing the sprint number 1. We have 3 priorities left over from last week: build, design documents, sprint backlog. Oh yeah, that's another element that we introduced. Implementation, and then the priorities for this week, in addition to kind of finishing this stuff off, is implementation, early integration, code review process, introducing code review process and stuff like that. So basically, being very clear exactly what what their jobs are for that week. Another example of everybody now working diligently is thanks to the task boards that are provided. So as far as the Scrum experience, the task boards were definitely a very good thing for us, except that we had to make a modification. Like I said, and I think the next slide is the one, yep. So like I said, at first what we did is we had each team basically be on the same board. And the layout of the room was such that, let's say if this is the board, then everybody's working around the edges of the room, right, and kind of doing their thing. So as a result, basically, in order for them to kind of see what's going on the task board, they have to turn around, and probably also have to get up to actually go physically to the task board. And just because of this particular layout, I felt that this wasn't really used. I mean, partially, they were still kind of figuring out how to do this, but I think just the geographical particularities of the situations just did not allow us to basically utilize this to the maximum ability. So what we did is we split it up for, I don't know, like 3 minutes. We split it up into team-based task boards, where basically each team was responsible for each one. And they kind of took the idea and they split it up into, did it slightly differently. Like some people, for example, would color code it based on the person that was working on the stuff. Some people would, use stickies that were more visible, others that were less visible, stuff like that, right? And these task boards were basically right there, next to the team. So that the team, let's say, have 4 people, they're working here, and the task board is right there. So if somebody wants to change the task, the status of a task, they don't have to even get up. They can just very easily, move things around, right? So that, so I think that was a very, very big improvement for us over this. Let's see. So burn down charts, I already mentioned that we didn't really do estimations, and it ultimately didn't really end up working for us. Partially also because it was somewhat fluid environment. In a strict Scrum sprint, you need to define exactly what you're going to accomplish during a sprint, and you basically should not deviate from this. Because we had a total of, literally 3 weeks of actual development time, we didn't really have that luxury, right? If we had new information, we had to assimilate it right away. So well-defined sprints was very effective. Everybody knew exactly what we were working on. Task board was good after changes. Daily meetings, once again, from before. One thing I'll say about daily meetings is the Scrum process says that they should not be more than 15 minutes. And I sort of tried to push it and make it as fast as possible, but ultimately it was minimum of 30 minutes to 45 minutes. And I think sort of what I came to terms with it by basically explaining that it wasn't just a meeting to communicate status, where you have a lot of seasoned developers who know exactly what they're doing. It was a combination meeting to communicate status and also to provide some basically training, mentoring opportunities. Because I couldn't, for example, trust them to know that something is an issue always where I knew it to be an issue, right? So sometimes a lot of it was me trying to identify, okay, you're saying that you don't have any impediments, but what about that? And they're like, oh, okay, I guess that makes sense, right? So with experienced developers, I think it's something you can probably count on. In this particular case, that wasn't necessarily the case. Spikes, like I said, was very effective. QA leads was very effective for us as well. Okay, so let me just conclude this. Okay, several problems emerged, or at least some of these I felt there were problems. So what's a task? We had 4 different ways to communicate what a task is. We had a requirements management tool that we're using, so a requirement can map to a task. We had a task board and a sticky note related to a task. We had an issue tracking system, which could also result in a task. And then we also had a dashboard, which I mentioned, which I was using from before. So I don't know, it's not something I ever really figured out. Issue tracking is something we never really started using very heavily. And the requirements management was kind of a little bit of a side process. So I guess this was really, the two. But sort of if we were to continue this for a little bit longer, this would have been a problem. As far as dashboards, since I really liked the whole dashboard experience from the fall class, I went a little crazy with the dashboards, and so I had like a 10 priorities for each team that I would try to update every single morning for every single team. And that turned out to be not extremely useful because basically it was just too much information that I was trying to glean from the people, and so and it's not particularly exciting to basically say, what about this? This is 2. What about this? This is 3. What about this? This is 4. Right? So basically, I would sort of identify the ones that I really care about and would update those, and the other ones that I would kind of let lapse a little bit. So basically, if you're going to use something like a dashboard, they're very effective, but don't overdo it. Okay, burn down charts I already talked about. Team meetings I also talked about. So this is a QA dashboard example. And so here it was actually quite effective, right? So everybody had to have some kind of test plan. Everybody had to have some kind of unit tests. They were supposed to run, coverage. Check style is kind of an Eclipse plugin that enforces coding standards, so they all had to have something like that. Stubbing faking was a way for us to anticipate integration challenges, where basically at the end of week 2, I asked them, hey, you guys are all, writing to interfaces. I want to make sure that you create a fake class that even if, that doesn't do anything, but at least you can prove to me that you can integrate between different components. Some kind of message passing that doesn't do anything at all, but at least gives you some idea that you're thinking about the problem. Which followed by integration testing, by the real integration testing, and test modeling in kind of a more sophisticated QA tool. So that's basically it. The task board for each team, dashboard, don't overdo it. Scrum meetings, minimum 30 minutes, and so the whole idea of a QA dashboard and QA lead, turned out to be very effective. And the final sort of, the final result was that this was the most successful team, and in some ways I can even show you metrics to prove it. In addition to this, they kind of took this to another level, and they had a social task dashboard. This is more like to go get some Turkish food, or to go bowling and stuff like that. So this was the best project of the 3. It accomplished the most, and there was the most emphasis on quality. There's 2 reasons for that. First of all, I feel that I got better at running these types of programs, so I can't really, sort of take that away. Students were much better, and it was a smaller team. And Scrum was definitely also a big factor.
So sorry, I have to step in, but we have to give everybody the opportunity to get some burn on themselves and their projects later.
Okay. Okay.
I want to thank everybody. Thank you so much.